Hello everybody on the Wrestling Multiverse YouTube channel. How y'all doing? We got our very first, and it might be our very only, reaction video on the channel. Everybody's watching this, need you to hit the like button, hit subscribe, and comment what you think down below. Don't comment till the end of the video though, when you actually know what's going on. Anyways, today's gonna be a very interesting one, because today I saw this list and I wasn't even fully sure if it should go on this channel or one of the actual reaction channels. But my friend, I had a friend I discussed it with, Christian. You've seen him on the tier list video, the first one we did, and we thought it should go in. So this is from a channel called Savox, and there's 10 of the most evil wrestlers. So, you know, we gotta watch it. We gotta watch it here on the Wrestling Multiverse YouTube channel. So let's get right into it. 10 of the most evil wrestlers. Let's go. By the way, there's 57 minutes and 27 seconds long. So this is gonna be really long, but I guarantee it'll be worth the discussion. Dragunov!
In professional wrestling, there's always
How is Dragunov not in 2K22? Just saying.
two kinds of characters. There's the fan favorite good guy or babyface, who the crowd always rally behind, and the villainous heel, who the crowd are meant to boo and root against when they wrestle the babyface. Now, of course, these wrestlers are only playing characters. There's plenty of heels who are actually known for being nice and friendly outside of the ring, and some babyfaces
I'm cold, baby. That's my main example of that.
who have a reputation for being assholes to the fans and their fellow wrestlers, with Hulk
Hogan, Chris Jericho, a couple more, but yeah.
Hogan being a good example of this, as he portrayed a good guy for much of his career on screen, but was known for being a ruthless backstage politician who'd always use his standing in the wrestling industry to hold back the careers of others while furthering his own, and frequently refused to put others over by losing to them. Some wrestlers, however, whether they portray heels or babyfaces, have had run-ins with the law, with some even having extensive criminal backgrounds. There is a small group, however, that are truly deplorable and irredeemable individuals who have committed some truly horrible acts, ranging from open bigotry, predatory behavior, and even murder. And in this video, I'll be covering 10 of them. Here are 10 of the most evil wrestlers.
Dick Murdoch. Okay? I'm putting this down. I want my full attention on this.
Hoyt Richard Murdoch was an American professional wrestler born in 1946. He was a second-generation superstar, being the stepson of Frankie Hill Murdoch, and also grew up with future wrestling legends Terry and Dory Funk. After starting his wrestling career in 1965 and wrestling in a tag team with Don Carson, he eventually found himself tagging with a man who had become one of the most iconic and influential people in wrestling history, the American Dream Dusty Rhodes, in a tag team called the Texas Outlaws. However, this team did not last long, and after the split, Murdoch would wrestle throughout various territories in the United States, and eventually went to wrestle in Japan, where he would have high-profile matches with All Japan Pro Wrestling founder Giant Baba, and even
I do have the facts. I don't think this guy's a wrestling channel, but this guy knows his shit. He knows his stuff.
got to wrestle another one of the all-time greats, Harley Race, for the NWA World Championship. In 1980, he returned to the US and wrestled in the Mid-South Wrestling promotion, where he teamed with the Junkyard Dog. By this time, he had adopted a gimmick similar to that of his real-life persona, a beer-drinking working man, which earned him the nickname Captain Redneck, because, and these are not my words, he, quote, really embodied every attribute of the stereotypical white trash redneck. Considering details that would come out about him years later, it's surprising to see Murdoch willingly teaming with an African-American wrestler, and he and Junkyard Dog even became tag team champions. In 1981, Murdoch returned to Japan for what would be his most successful run, where he would wrestle against legends like Tatsumi Fujinami, and even scored a victory over Antonio Inoki, probably the most iconic and influential wrestler in Japan's history, while teaming with Stan Hansen.
Hell yeah, my man Stan Hansen. Love the fucking brownness and ugliness of Stan Hansen.
another Texas wrestler and future Hall of Famer. He even had encounters with a young Hulk Hogan. Despite his success,
Fuck Hulk Hogan.
Murdoch actually harbored a dark secret that the fans were unaware of. Among his fellow wrestlers, he was known to be a racist bigot who displayed hatred towards minorities, particularly African American wrestlers.
Well, this is already a good, horrible dark path for this stupid ass.
Rocky Johnson, father of Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, once told a story that Murdoch intentionally and repeatedly kicked him for real during a match because of his skin color. Johnson warned.
I'm sorry I'm calling so many times, but it's just like, to be that racist towards someone, even so that in the wrestling industry, who the hell? Give me a second. As I was saying, I apologize. Be that racist that in the wrestling industry where you're supposed to protect the people who are in front of you, protect the people you are across the ring on. You're supposed to make sure they're safe. Now, to actually kick someone multiple times during a match just because they're black or in any other skin color besides yourself is completely bullshit to me. Not bullshit that happened, it's bullshit that he did it. Like, and not even a PG thing. If you're shocked that I'm swearing, don't be. I'm going to be swearing probably a lot more by the way this goes. But like, Jesus H. Christ, man, that's freaking deplorable.
Murdoch that if he continued, he would go into business for himself and knock Murdoch out cold. Murdoch
I would love to have known that story happened and he actually got knocked out.
Ignored the warning and continued hitting him. Johnson then proceeded to knock Murdoch out cold and left him a bloody mess as the match was thrown out.
Awesome. There you go, my man. Oh, that is awesome.
There's also...
And well deserved. Good on Rocky Johnson for knocking that son of a bitch out.
The story of Murdoch taking Dusty Rhodes for a drive and not telling him where they were going. When they finally arrived at their destination, Rhodes was shocked to find that Murdoch had taken him to a Ku Klux Klan meeting.
Oh, hell no. Oh, no, you took me to it. Oh, no, you take me to a meeting like that. No. Then I would have. Oh, hell would be breaking loose. I would not be walking out, let me tell you that, because I'd be calling so much hell on everybody.
Rhodes, however, politely asked that Murdoch take him home. Indeed, several wrestlers have stated that Dick Murdoch was a card-carrying KKK member. In 2018, Tony Atlas recounted a story in which he and fellow wrestler Tommy Rich were told about an event happening in a local park, saying it was a party that Atlas and Rich should go to because, quote, they'd be the life of the party. When they arrived, Tommy Rich immediately told Atlas to get down and hide. When Atlas got down, he saw that only a few feet away was a KKK member patrolling the area armed with a shotgun. Murdoch had sent Atlas and Rich to a Klan rally as a joke, knowing full well that the two of them could have been seriously injured or even killed. When the two of them
You stupid, dumbass, Dick Murdoch. The fact that that's a joke to him, to take a black guy to a KKK meeting, telling him he's the life of the party is BS. It's so fucking stupid. It's unbelievable. I had to calm myself down for that one. What a dumbass thing to do, though.
Told him what had happened, he just laughed, reveling in the fact that he'd made them fear for their lives.
So I would go back dressed like a Dickie. Why are you trying to do this? And he said, well, we didn't think you were going to really go. And it was just a rip.
So was Dick Murdoch actually in the KKK, or was that just a...
No, he was out there. He told me he was. He told me himself. That came straight from his mouth.
Rocky Johnson told us that he was as well, so...
Yeah, well, Dick didn't hide it. He wasn't ashamed of it.
Murdoch died of a heart attack in 1996 at the age of 49, and since his death, he's never been acknowledged by the WWE, despite the company owning all of the footage of his matches in the US.
Not shocked by that. I wouldn't want to acknowledge him either.
They tend to avoid bringing up wrestlers with controversy surrounding them, and, naturally, don't want to bring attention to a man who openly flaunted his association with the world's most infamous hate group. There will certainly be people on this list who are worse than Dick Murdoch, but there's no denying that, as an open racist, he was definitely an awful person.
The Guaranteed MasterCard from Capital One gets you a $300 to $7,000 credit limit and is great.
Ludwig Borga, okay.
Ludwig Borga had what may be one of the most bizarre lives of any wrestler in history. He was born Tony Christian Halmi in Helsinki, Finland in 1963. He came from a broken home, with his father walking out on his family when he was only 6 months old. With his mother being a hopeless alcoholic, it fell on Borga's older brother to raise him, as their mother was too busy drinking and having flings with many different men. Borga said that his brother was the only true friend he ever had, even as an adult. He was a target of severe bullying in school, and in his teens, began bodybuilding to grow big enough to fight off his bullies. In the 1980s, he moved to the United States and got a job as a bodyguard for the rock band Cheap Trick, and also Gene Simmons. In 1993, after several years of wrestling in Japan, Borga came back to the United States and was signed to Vince McMahon's WWE. The company knew Borga's in-ring skills were limited, but they believed his look compensated for this. One thing about his look that would be a problem, however, was that he had an SS tattoo on his left calf. The SS, of course, stood for Schutzstaffel, an organization run by Adolf Hitler and the
I'm just answering a text and then I'll get back to the video. Just give me a second. I apologize, guys. But hold on. I've still, this hasn't left my brain. This guy had a SS thing, which stood for a group that was run by Adolf Hitler. Fuck him. Fuck him. Fuck him. Fuck him. Fuck Ludwig Borga. Fuck him.
The Nazi Party, and were the group most responsible for the deaths of 5 to 6 million Jewish people. Borga having a tattoo of such a terrible organization's logo showed what kind of person he was behind the scenes. He was an open racist and homophobe, something that would become far more apparent as the years went by once his wrestling career ended. Borge's
Fuck 'em.
1998 biography, God Forgives, I Do Not, and its 2001 follow-up, The Day of Judgment.
No one wants a biography from this little shithole. No one wants a biography from this fuck. Like, no one's sitting there going, I don't know, live with Borga's life. Like, no one cares about your ass.
Would denounce his homophobia and racism to the world. In one passage about his time in prison, he details saying the following to a black prisoner: "Hey monkey, even if I'm the fattest person in the world, I can always get skinny, but the skin does not turn white, even when washed."
But what a fucking idiotic thing to say. Like, I hate this guy. Hate this guy already. Completely hate this guy. Want this guy to burn in hell.
This book led to him developing a following among the far-right groups in Finland, which allowed him to write 3 more books and even launch a singing career.
Of course he did, because, you know, a bunch of racist, idiotic dipshits. Of course love a guy who's like, fucking this idiot.
His most famous song being Vikinki, which translates to Viking. In this song, he proclaims his homophobia with this lyric. Borge took this momentum and propelled his career towards a new area, politics. His celebrity and unrepentant views would attract him to the far-right True Finns party. Under this party's banner, Borge was elected to Finland's parliament in March of 2000.
What? This idiot was put in a parliament? Finland's gone down deep. Finland clearly went downhill at this moment. Finland went downhill so much, this guy was a suitable candidate for that fucking parliament. This little... God, poor Finland.
He captured 16,390 votes in the Helsinki constituency, a number the Finnish media would describe as staggering. The day after his victory, he said in a radio interview, "If a lesbian can be elected president, then why can't I be elected to parliament?" After immediate media backlash, Borge responded by saying that he truly thought that the Finnish president was a lesbian, despite being married to a man. Only 4 months into his term, however, Borge, drunk and high on amphetamines, got into a lengthy argument with his wife that ended with him attempting to shoot her. With an illegally owned military pistol, he missed and police arrived on the scene to arrest him. But the amphetamine in his system resulted in him needing to be immediately hospitalized. While there, he slipped into a coma that lasted several weeks. He also apparently suffered brain damage while in the coma. He would spend 4 months in prison, yet still keep his political position.
How? How do you keep your political power while still being in jail? How? I don't understand it. How?
Wife had filed for divorce in 2005 and revealed in a tell-all biography that Borge had threatened her with deadly weapons more than once and had even threatened her with an axe. His life went on a continued downward spiral after this, with him being arrested several times for getting into fights, drunk driving, and drug possession. The brain damage he received during his coma also continued to affect him, with him gradually losing his ability to walk and speak. He was arrested for the final time in October 2009, where he was found to be driving under the influence of cocaine and amphetamines. He would not make it to court, however, as 3 months later, on January 8, 2010, Borge took his own life via gunshots at the age of 47. Borge's life was certainly strange, and could even be interesting to read about for some people.
He's dead good. Fuck him.
But as an open neo-Nazi, homophobe, and domestic abuser, he was truly a man with no redeeming qualities, and definitely belongs on a list like this.
Dynamite Kid, okay. Anyone who watched Dark Side of the Ring knows this thing, but I'll let it go.
Tom Billington was a British professional wrestler born in Lancashire, England in 1958. His family had a long history of taking part in combat sports, with his father, uncle and grandfather all being boxers, and prior to that, his family actually had a history of being executioners. He began his career in 1976, and after spending
Imagine how in a family it's just a history of executioners. It's kind of messed up in all honesty.
2 years wrestling in the UK, he was scouted for Stu Hart's Stampede Wrestling promotion in Calgary, Alberta, Canada.
I think what I'm going to do now is let each individual 1 to 10, I'm going to let them play. Unless there's a moment where I need to pause to discuss something, then I will. Because not it's going to go on for hours, but who knows. This is my plan format. It probably will change.
While there, he would wrestle Stu Hart's sons, most notably a young Bret the Hitman Hart, who has since gone on to say that he considers Billington to be, quote, pound for pound, the greatest wrestler who ever lived. It was in Canada that Billington would begin to take steroids after being introduced to them by fellow wrestler the Junkyard Dog, and would also start taking speeds, which he had been introduced to by Jake the Snake Roberts. After wrestling in Canada for a year, Billington made the move to Japan. In 1982, Dynamite Kid had an instant classic with Tiger Mask for the WWF Junior Heavyweight Championship at Madison Square Garden in New York City. Some consider this match to be one of the greatest matches of all time. Billington left Japan to join the WWF. It was here that he would form a tag team with his cousin, Davey Boy Smith. The two would call themselves the British Bulldogs. While the two enjoyed success, Billington became greatly disliked by his fellow wrestlers due to his erratic behavior. Many saw him as a bully due to the mean-spirited and sometimes aggressive pranks he would play on the other wrestlers. The most infamous prank was on a young wrestler named Mitch Snow, who Billington believed talked too much. As a prank, Billington drugged him with sleeping pills, defecated in his bag, and shaved off his eyebrows. He also once brutally assaulted fellow wrestler Jacques Rougeau backstage. Rougeau retaliated by attacking him with a roll of quarters, knocking out 4 of Billington's teeth and leaving his face swollen. In 1988, the WWF, having grown tired of Billington's behavior, fired him. He then returned to wrestling in Japan. During this time, a back injury he suffered in 1984, plus an arm injury sustained while on tour caused him to become even more aggressive, but this time, he turned his rage on his wife. His wife, Michelle, who is the sister of Bret Hart's ex-wife, Julie, has gone into detail of how violent her husband could be.
It started with the verbal abuse and, putting me down in front of other people.
He certainly wasn't the guy you fell in love with.
No. He was the gentleman that kicked out his wife and 3-week-old baby.
The most infamous story of how he treated her involves him waking her up with a gun pointed at her head and telling her that next time it would be loaded. Another story also involved him pointing a gun at her face while dragging her by the hair. Billington's abuse of his wife pushed her to consider taking her own, as well as those of her children, so that they could all escape from him.
I just wanted to get out, and the way I was going to get out was I put my 2 children on the bed, the master bed, Bronwyn and Merrick. And Tom had a lot of guns, so I went to get his gun, and I wanted to shoot Bronwyn and Merrick, and then myself. And the only reason I didn't do it is because I couldn't guarantee that we would all.
Finally, in 1991, Michelle bought Billington a plane ticket back to England, making it clear that she wanted him out of her and their children's lives. He responded by telling her to leave their home instead. She refused, which enraged him. Billington grabbed a gun, threatening her to leave and even putting the gun to her head. All the while, their children watched in hysterics. Michelle called the police, but ultimately, she took the children and left. He returned to the UK later that year. Over the next few years, he continued his hard drug use, which
This is a guy who clearly had a downward spiral.
ultimately took their toll on his body. He had his final match in 1996, by which time he had lost all the muscle he built up during his years of steroid abuse. He had grown so thin that his tights no longer fit him, and as you can see in this footage, he just seemed tired and weak, and only seemed capable of performing rest holds, with his only actual move in the match being a tombstone piledriver. The very next day after the match, he suffered a seizure at the airport and had to be hospitalized. This was how his career ended. The next year, Billington, who who had a long history of injuries to his legs and back, mostly brought about by his use of the flying headbutt as his finisher, which caused irreparable damage to his spine, lost the use of his left leg, which confined him to a wheelchair for the rest of his life. He would die on December 5, 2018, his 60th birthday. His ex-wife Michelle believed that his steroid use was the cause of his violent nature, but even if that's the case, that doesn't excuse his cruelty to her and their children. He's considered to be one of the greatest wrestlers to have ever lived, and while there's certainly no disputing his talent, there's no denying that he was a cruel man who didn't even consider his actions to be overly violent.
I don't think it was violent. I mean, I put a shotgun under it in once, but I had no shells. I only pretended that.
Seeing how he turned out makes you think that karma really does exist.
Karma is a bitch. Hard Body Harrison. Okay, I don't know this guy.
Harrison Norris Jr., better known as Hardbody Harrison or sometimes Hardbody Harris, had a much shorter career than almost everyone else on this list and saw no success whatsoever, but he has gone down in history as one of the biggest scumbags in professional wrestling. Born in 1966 in Kennesaw, Georgia, he attended high school in Pensacola, Florida. Upon graduating in 1985, he joined the United States Army and served in the Gulf War, where he took part in Operation Desert Shield and Operation Desert Storm. After receiving an honorable discharge in 1995, he traveled to Atlanta, Georgia to begin training at WCW's training center known as the Power Plant. Within the same year, he debuted for the promotion as an enhancement talent or a jobber, meaning his role was to lose to more established stars to help them look good. Indeed, in his 4 years with the company, Harrison never won a single match, and the only thing people knew him for was his bizarre ring gear. He wrestled his last match for the company in 1999, but he remained under contract until 2001, when WCW was purchased by Vince McMahon. Harrison's contract was not picked up by the WWE, and he retired from wrestling soon after. Upon stepping away from the ring, he was involved in a multi-plaintiff lawsuit filed by Sonny Ono on behalf of WCW talent against their former employer, AOL Time Warner, charging the company with racial discrimination. The suit was settled out of court.
I do find it hilarious that people sue them for things, especially Sonny Ono. Like, what the heck? I don't know any story about that, though. So it could be true, but I mean, there's nothing that stands out that made me think that.
For which all the performers, including Harrison, received a large financial settlement.
I guess clearly they had something in line if that's the case.
Following his WCW days, Harrison competed in the FX series Tough Man, capturing the show's heavyweight championship in 2000. He wasn't seen again until 2005, when he was spotted at an event put on by Vince Russo's Ring of Glory promotion. According to fellow WCW wrestler Disco Inferno, Harrison had 8 women with him, who were all very quiet and wouldn't speak to anybody, and had a look on their face that gave off the impression that they were lost.
Vince Russo had a religious show, and it's called Glory, like Ring of Glory. He did a Christian wrestling show one time after WCW, and Hardbody showed up, and he had like 8 girls with him, and they all were just like very quiet, and they wouldn't speak to anybody. It just looked very weird, you know. Like it's just kind of like they all kind of had the same look, expression, kind of like just like they were lost, you know, stuff.
Little did anyone know at the time that these women were not Harrison's friends. They were his prisoners. Later that same year, Harrison was arrested after it was reported that he had been keeping 8 women captive in his home.
What? Hold on. No. What? Hold on. How much influence they had over these girls? These girls, 8 women, were kidnapped or held hostage by this guy in his home. And yet somehow it always, they just kind of bow to his will. I wonder what he must have tortured them or threatened them with some shit or bringing them out places. Like, he did something that makes them believe that they don't want to attempt to escape this guy, right? What the hell is wrong with this dude?
He was charged with aggravated sexual abuse, forced labor, sex trafficking, conspiracy, and witness tampering. Harrison, serving as his own attorney, contended that the women lived in his home with his wife and child because they wanted to train as professional wrestlers, and that he helped them quit drugs. Witnesses contested that Harrison had manipulated the women psychologically, forcing them. The victims contested that Harrison's rigid training regimen, consisting of a wide variety of exercises and household chores, and having to memorize a series of commandments, was designed to make them into prostitutes. His wrestling career ended up taking him nowhere. But because of his actions outside of the ring, he'll always be remembered, but for all the wrong reasons, as one of the most evil men in the history of professional wrestling.
This one I know too, so I'll let this one play. And if Dynamite Kid, I know him.
Aurelian Smith was a professional wrestler from Whitesboro, Texas, born in 1932. Originally an oil worker, he took up wrestling in 1958, adopting the name Grizzly Smith, no doubt inspired by his large 6'10" frame and hair-covered torso. He was yet another wrestler on this list who never really saw much success, despite having a long career. The highest profile match he had was against the legendary Classy Freddie Blassie for the NWA Georgia World Heavyweight Championship, but he lost the match. His wrestling career isn't worth talking about, as nobody really remembers him for his in-ring work. These days, Grizzly Smith is more infamous for his life outside of wrestling. To put it simply, this man was a monster. He fathered his first child in 1955 at the age of 23. At the time of the child's conception, he was dating a single mother who had a 13-year-old daughter named Paula. However, the woman Grizzly was dating was not the mother of his first child. He had f***ed himself on Paula, leading to her becoming pregnant with his son, Aurelian.
This poor young girl is taken advantage of by this disgusting man. And made pregnant. What a fucking prick.
Smith Jr.
My father was a pedophile. Disgusting.
Son's Jake Lobs. Poor Jake.
Pedophile. Which would haunt me the rest of my life.
He and Paula were forced to marry, and over the next several years, they had 2 more children before Grizzly left Paula when she was 17, at which point she abandoned her children, and the 3 of them were passed around to different homes. After leaving Paula, Grizzly remarried to a woman named Marcia, who was only 16 when the two married. With his eldest
Can this poor man date someone his own motherfucking age, please? Like, what the fuck, this ignorant little fucking prick.
son, Aurelian Jr., coming back to live with them after the death of his grandmother. Marcia would abuse Jr. and would beat him whenever he tried to tell his father. Grizzly was actually completely aware of what was happening, as he was doing the same thing to his daughters. It apparently all started with his daughter Robin when she was 8 years old. This went on for 6 years before Robin eventually told her mother, at which point they left. A year later, Robin warned her father that if he ever tried anything again, she would shoot him with his own gun. In 1978, Grizzly's older daughter Jolene was kidnapped and murdered, with her husband's ex-wife being the prime suspect in the case. While the ex-wife did confess to the kidnapping, she said that she was not the one who murdered Jolene, as she had escaped. Years later, Grizzly's family said that they believed he may have been the real culprit behind Jolene's death, as he had, quote, the most to lose, because Jolene not only suffered at his hands, but was also aware of him most likely abusing other young girls who he'd take out on the road with him. He also stopped his son Richard from taking the case to the TV show Unsolved Mysteries, with the only reason he could possibly have for stopping them from covering the story being that he didn't want the mystery to be solved. Grizzly continued his deplorable behavior towards young girls into the 80s, with Robin saying that the last time it happened, he had shown up at her home with a 9-year-old girl and spent the night there. Robin stayed awake the whole night talking to the girl. The next morning, she forced him to leave and wouldn't allow him to take the girl with him.
He got up the next morning, got all his things together and said, come on, we gotta go. And I said, you're gonna go, but she's not going anywhere. She's staying right here. I was not letting this girl go anywhere. I think that told him everything he needed to know about how I felt.
3 of Grizzly's children would also become wrestlers. Robin would become known as Rockin' Robin and would see some success in the WWE, winning the promotion's Women's Championship. Michael Smith would become known as Sam Houston. He seemed to be Grizzly's favorite son, as Michael is said to have idolized him, and most likely would have sided with his father if he had known about the abuse his siblings suffered at his hands. His career was not successful due to his many run-ins with the law related to drink driving, which eventually saw him sentenced to 10 years in prison in 2005. Grizzly's eldest son, Aurelian Jr., was the first of his children to take up wrestling. He chose to become a wrestler out of hatred for his father, who would constantly tell him that he was a failure and never amount to anything. Junior wanted to overshadow his father, not just to spite him, but also so he'd be proud of him.
He didn't want me in wrestling, period. In fact, he got me fired a couple places, asked the promoters to fire me. Father looked at me and said, "I'm ashamed of you, you're gutless, and you'll never amount to anything." That was my whole drive. I got into wrestling because I hated my father. And I was going to break it off in his ass. I wanted to hear my father say, "I'm proud of you, son."
Aurelian Jr., of course, would become known exclusively as Jake the Snake Roberts, one of the most famous wrestlers of the 1980s and a WWE Hall of Fame inductee. Grizzly Smith would become all but forgotten. It wasn't until the 1999 documentary Beyond the Mat where he would finally appear on screen again, although his appearance follows a scene in which Jake Roberts details the story behind his conception and what kind of a man his father was.
My mother was 13 years old when I was born. Why? Because my dad, the little girl that was in a room asleep. My dad was going out with my mother's mother. There you go. There's some bones for Jake the Snake.
When he's being interviewed, Grizzly actually had the nerve to say that he loved Jake and that he was born out of love.
He's got a lot of good qualities, and he was born out of love, and I still love him.
You're a disgusting man. You're a disgusting human being, Grizzly. You're a disgusting human being. How? Shame on you. Fuck you.
But considering Jake has said that Grizzly never apologized for anything he put his children through, he was obviously lying. Jake Roberts has been using his ring name as his real name for nearly 40 years, clearly not wanting to have his father's name attached to him. Grizzly Smith died in 2010 from Alzheimer's disease. While I honestly don't think anyone deserves to suffer from Alzheimer's or dementia, I really do have a hard time feeling sorry for a man who spent so many years abusing his own children and many more years abusing other people's children and possibly murdered his own daughter.
Yeah, no sympathy at all.
As I said, nobody ever talks about Grizzly Smith in regards to his career anymore. These days, the only time people talk about Grizzly Smith is to discuss what a truly sick and disgusting monster he was.
I'm a crypto investor
who knows a thing or two about minimizing risk.
Does that make me book smart? No.
You used to be a wrestler, didn't you? Is that right?
I still am.
Are you?
I'm feared in every girls' school in this country.
I don't know this guy, so we're gonna let this one play out too.
If you live in the UK, then this man should need no introduction. For decades, Jimmy Savile was one of the most recognisable faces on British TV. He was famous for hosting shows like Top of the Pops and, of course, Jim Will Fix It, and also for his charity work, to the point where he was even named a Knight of the British Empire. He was also well known for being into fitness, regularly photographed while out jogging, and filmed at many marathons over the years. What less people remember is that Savile was also a part-time wrestler, taking part in over 100 matches between the late 50s and early 70s. When he began wrestling, he was already a popular radio DJ in the north of England, particularly in his hometown of Bolton, and already had contacts with wrestlers. He'd often hire them as bouncers to work the doors of the various nightclubs he owned. It was actually former wrestler and fellow nightclub owner Man Mountain Bill Benny who got him into the business.
Mad Mountain Bill Benny. That's a heck of a name. That's a wrestling name right there.
This when he asked Savile to referee a match for him, to which the latter refused and said he wanted to actually wrestle a match rather than just be the referee. Savile was trained by Bert Jacobs, an amateur wrestler who would later go on to coach the UK's Olympic wrestling team, and a brawler named Les Kellett. After training for 6 weeks, Savile had his first match against British welterweight champion Gentleman Jim Lewis, who proceeded to break Savile's toe and beat him 2-1.
And it was my proud claim that I lost my first 35 fights.
Over the course of his career, he would often be beaten for real by his opponents who weren't interested in putting him over, and instead wanted to teach him a lesson for trying to use his celebrity status to make a name for himself in a business that he really had no place in. Despite the beatings he'd suffer, promoters praised Savile for apparently being game for anything in the ring, despite the damage he'd take. However, Savile finally called it quits on his wrestling career after a brutal beating at the hands of exotic Adrian Street, who, despite his flamboyant androgynous image, was well known for being an incredibly tough, no-nonsense worker. The match was originally supposed to be a draw, but Street, having no desire to work a match that would make Savile look good, went into business for himself and beat Savile to a pulp, leaving him.
These wrestlers are taking out this boy. With a brutal beating, like they are beating the shit out of this dude. All going business for himself, not letting him get anything here.
Him battered and bruised, with an injury from being dropped on his head. After this, Savile never wrestled another match. Now, Savile's wrestling career is obviously not what he's remembered for these days, nor why he's been so hated since his death. I'll get into those details, but first, here's an anecdote from Jimmy Savile himself, in which he revealed that he was quite sadistic back in the days where he was a club owner, and apparently used to tie people to chairs and have them mercilessly beaten until they pleaded to be let go.
In the dance halls, I invented zero tolerance. I wouldn't stand for any nonsense whatsoever. Ever. Ever, ever, ever. I was always in trouble with the law for being heavy-handed. Always. But I couldn't care less about that.
Ejecting people who were mucking about?
No, I never threw anybody out. Tied him up and put them down in the bloody boiler house until I was ready for them. At 2 o'clock in the fucking morning. They'd plead to get out. You know, if a copper came and said, you was a bit heavy with them, with that kid or those 2 guys, whatever, I'd say, your daughter comes in here. She's 16. She's not supposed to come into town, but she does, and she comes here. I presume you'd like me to look after her. If you don't want me to look after her, tell me, and I'll let them dirty slags do what they want to her. All right, Jim, all right, all right, all right. All right, then. Give me a fucking hard time, then. Yeah, you're right, you're right. You didn't give the bastard half enough, I'll tell you, Jim. Thank you, goodbye. And never got nicked. And I've never altered. I've got a zero tolerance for me.
Savile laughs as he remembers this, showing that he enjoyed seeing other people suffer. He was also known to despise children, despite presenting Jim'll Fix It, a show in which he arranged for children to take part in experiences they'd always dreamed of. People who worked at the BBC at the same time have said that children weren't exactly fond of Savile either, with many of them finding him to be creepy.
Obviously, I don't hate him. That's number one.
So why would you say that then?
Because we live in a very funny world. And it's easy for me as a single man to say, I don't like children, because that puts a lot of salacious tabloid people off the hunt.
And it's here that we come to what has made Jimmy Savile quite possibly the most hated man in the history of British television. Savile had a strong working relationship with Stoke Mandeville Hospital, being a public fundraiser for the facility. He was given free rein to walk around the hospital, visiting children. However, nurses at the hospital would sometimes tell the children there to pretend to be asleep when Savile was visiting. Years later, it would be revealed when, following Savile's death in 2011, hundreds of women came forward accusing him of indecent assault when they were young. Some of these allegations went as...
Oh, you little bastard. Alright, so that was it. I was waiting for it because, like, so far they've been saying shit. So far, like, I've heard him do some weird things, but it's, like, never been anything where I've jumped to a conclusion that he's bad or, like, jumped to a conclusion he's a horrible human being. There it is. Little fucker took advantage and done stuff to over 100 children or young women. And since it's over 100, I'm not gonna say it's bullshit. My guess, if it's over 100, there's fucking truth to it. There's fucking truth to it. So, fuck this guy.
As far back as the 1960s, and the accusations mostly came from people who were abused by Savile at Stoke Mandeville, Leeds Hospital, Duncroft School, and on the sets of Top of the Pops and Jim Will Fix It. Many of them had reported the incidents to the police over the years, but none of them amounted to anything. The police never believed the accusations due to Savile's reputation for his charity work. Another reason that the allegations never resulted in Savile facing any repercussions during his life is due to him having so many friends in high places.
There it is. Yep, once you have a connection to the royal family, doesn't matter, you can fucking murder everyone. Still get away with it.
As he was known to be well acquainted with the royal family, politicians, and executives at the BBC. Thanks to this, he was able to keep any controversy from sticking to him. It's believed that a lot of people who knew of Savile's antics and had a dislike for him, mostly comedy writers, attempted to hint at what Savile was doing through jokes on their TV shows.
8-year-old girls love Jimmy Savile though, don't they? And of course. Anyway, I won't go on.
Yeah. Yeah, he loves her slot. That's what I'm saying.
Oh, I'm so excited! I haven't been this excited since Jimmy Savile came to our open day at school and sat on my face.
Oh, God!
Oh.
Then, this here is a letter from little Timmy, aged 5. Now, dear Jim, I am in hospital, you see, and I wondered, could you do me a big favour? Please, 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 don't come and visit me, you sad man.
Most infamously, John Lydon, aka...
That last one is sort of funny. I don't know what show that's from. That's weird.
Sex Pistols frontman Johnny Rotten, in a 1978 interview, more or less exposed Savile, implying that what he was doing was an open secret amongst people in show business, and even stated that his comments would be suppressed by the BBC, and he was right, as the interview was not made public until 2013.
So who else is on the goner list?
Oh, it's endless, believe me. I just want to make a film of it. On film, I'd like to kill Jimmy Savile. I think he's a hypocrite.
Weren't I right?
I bet he's into all kinds of seediness that we all know about but are not allowed to talk about. I know some rumours. I bet none of this will be allowed out.
I should imagine libelous stuff will be allowed out.
Nothing I said is liable.
The allegations against Savile led to the police launching Operation U-Tree, an operation revolving around the investigation of historical sexual abuse allegations against various entertainers at the BBC, with the most notable arrest, of course, being that of Gary Glitter, who had already been convicted of offences in both the UK and Vietnam, and who I previously covered in my 7 of the Most Evil Musicians video. Jimmy Savile's presence in wrestling may have been the least significant out of everyone on this list so far, but out of all the entries, the revelations surrounding him and his evil actions is by far the most extreme, as it rocked an entire nation to its core.
I know of this one. I'll let this one play out.
James Wiley Smith, better known by his ring name Jimmy Superfly Snuka, was a Fijian professional wrestler. Born in 1943, his family moved to Hawaii when he was a child, where he began bodybuilding in the 1960s. After winning several awards in bodybuilding, he switched to a career in professional wrestling in 1968, and after spending over a decade wrestling in various territories in the US, he would eventually be signed to Vince McMahon Sr.'s WWF in 1981. Originally wrestling as a heel, he would have several matches against Bob Backlund during the latter's 6-year reign as WWF champion. The two had a classic cage match at Madison Square Garden in 1982, during which Snuka jumped from the top of the cage, a move which led to the bout being declared Match of the Year by Pro Wrestling Illustrated. The match also led to Snuka being a fan favourite despite being booked as a heel, due to the fans being wowed by his high-flying, high-risk wrestling style. He performed the same stunt in another Madison Square Garden cage match the next year, which is considered to be the defining moment of his career. Several future wrestlers, most notably a young Mick Foley, were in attendance that night and cited the moment Snuka jumped from the cage to be what inspired them to become wrestlers themselves. This was the peak of his career, however, as besides a few high-profile angles he was involved in, his career never really evolved past this point. By the late
I do find it hilarious that the fact that Snuka jumping off a cage for a second time is what caused his career to take off. That's kind of funny. Not the first time, second time.
Late 80s to early 90s, Snuka had essentially become what is known as a jobber to the stars, whereby he would always lose to younger rising stars, but at the very least still have good matches. During this time, he earned the distinction of having been the first wrestler to lose to The Undertaker at WrestleMania, beginning the latter's undefeated streak at the pay-per-view that would go unbroken for over 20 years. Snuka's career would continue for many years after this, and he would even be inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame.
Oh hell no, no wrestling show ever booked Jimmy was come up. Who the hell booked that? Oh, that should be. Oh, what a shitty booker that is.
But for as well remembered as he is for his in-ring accomplishments, for much of his life, there was a dark shadow hanging over him for an incident that occurred in 1983. At some point before the incident, Snuka had been introduced to a young woman named Nancy Argentino, who he had met backstage at an event at Madison Square Garden, and though Snuka was already married at the time, the two began an affair soon after. Nancy's family wasn't sure what to make of Snuka, as he was very quiet and kept to himself, with him only occasionally talking around them, and even then he only spoke to Nancy. Snuka also had a violent side, which was brought about by his cocaine use. Nancy's sister recalled one incident where Snuka threatened to kill Nancy while they were having dinner. He attempted to make amends by offering Nancy's sister a bag of cocaine as an apology. This was not an isolated incident, as sometime later, Nancy's sister received a phone call at 2 a.m. Nancy was screaming at her down the phone, saying, "He's chasing me." Nancy's sister then called the police, who arrived at the hotel Snuka and Nancy were staying at to find Snuka grabbing Nancy by the hair, and upon attempting to intervene, were met with, quote, almost superhuman strength from Snuka, who resisted arrest. Snuka was arrested for assault and harassment, but would avoid jail time due to an affidavit signed by Nancy. Her family begged her to stay home and avoid Snuka. Unfortunately, Nancy did not heed their advice and went back to him. On May 10, 1983, Snuka called for an ambulance, saying Nancy had been seriously injured. She was transported to Allentown's Sacred Heart Medical Center, where she died shortly after of, quote, undetermined craniocerebral injuries. The coroner reported
Now knowing the backstory and all that, I have a feeling that Snuka is not innocent in this now.
Reported that Nancy had died of traumatic brain injuries consistent with a moving head striking a stationary object. They also noted that Nancy was covered in cuts and bruises, indicating severe domestic abuse. Pathologists determined that the cause of death was most likely foul play, and that the death should be treated as a homicide until proven otherwise. Snuka claimed that Nancy had slipped and hit her head earlier on the day of her death, obviously trying to take any suspicion off of himself. Although charges were not pressed at the time against Snuka, the case was left officially open. In 1985, Nancy's parents won a $500,000 default judgment case against Snuka in the U.S. District Court in Philadelphia, although he never paid, claiming financial inability. On September 1st, 2015, 32 years after the incident, Snuka was arrested and charged with third-degree murder and involuntary manslaughter for Nancy.
Give me a second. Sorry about that. I had to splash some water in my face.
Nancy's death, to which he pleaded not guilty. By the time the case was reopened, Snooker was 72 years old and in the early stages of Alzheimer's disease. A hearing to determine Snooker's competency for trial began in May 2016. Snooker's attorneys argued that a forensic psychologist found Snooker's mental and physical health to be deteriorating. On July 1, 2016, it was ruled that Snooker was not mentally competent to stand trial for the murder, and that a new hearing would be held 6 months later to re-evaluate his competency, though his attorneys maintained that his condition wouldn't improve over time.
No, if you're old, condition isn't going to improve over time. That's not how that works.
As he had also been diagnosed with stomach cancer. The charges were formally dropped on January 3, 2017, after it was determined that Snooker could not stand trial. He died 10 days later at the age of 73. During the period of the trial, WWE had removed Snooker from its Hall of Fame and also deleted his profile from its website. It was clear that they knew that had Snooker been seen as fit to stand trial, he would have most likely have been found guilty for Nancy's murder, and cut ties with him as a way of distancing themselves from the situation, especially since it was later revealed that Chairman Vince McMahon was the one who convinced Nancy not to press charges against Snooker after he was arrested for abusing her. And during the initial murder investigation, he had told the police that he had never heard of any issues between Snooker and Nancy, even though the assault was in the news. Like Dynamite Kid, there's no denying that Jimmy Snuka is one of the all-time greats in the world of professional wrestling, and paved the way for many of the high-flying wrestlers who would come after him. But the fact that behind the scenes, he was a cruel and violent drug addict who abused Nancy Argentino to the point where she was afraid to leave him, and would eventually murder her in a drug-fueled rage, a crime which he never faced any real punishment for, shows that he really was an irredeemable man, whose legacy will always be overshadowed by the horrific act he committed all those years ago.
Yeah, Snooker's legacy has gone downhill and will be downhill pretty much the rest of the time. Brian McGee, don't know this one.
Brian Michael McGee is a former professional wrestler born in 1984 in St. Louis, Missouri. He apparently had a rough upbringing, with his parents never having much money, meaning he and his siblings would often have to go days without a proper meal, and would have to ration every bit of food they got to survive. His family's low income and social status led him to being bullied throughout much of his time at school. Growing up, he always dreamed of becoming a professional wrestler. This motivated him in sports at school, and he became a varsity athlete in a number of sports. He also briefly served in the Navy after graduating high school. After spending some time working in a pawn shop, he decided to finally make the jump to wrestling in 2006. With his 6'7", 280-pound frame, McGee towered
Stupid shit going on in the hallway, on my hallway. As I was saying, 6'7", 280, that's a good damn size right there. Good size for a pro wrestler. But I guess he's not on the list for that, so what do you do?
Over most of his opponents, which made him a big attraction on the indie scene. After making a name for himself and winning several championships on the Midwest wrestling scene, he was ranked 476 out of 500 in Pro Wrestling Illustrated's Wrestler of the Year ranking in 2009. In 2010, McGee landed himself a developmental deal with the WWE, where he would wrestle in their developmental territory, Florida Championship Wrestling.
Now the person across the hall from me is losing his mind.
Under the name DT Porter, he would spend 2 years wrestling there, going up against the likes of Eric Rowan and future WWE champion Biggie Langston. In 2012, McGee was released from the company after spending a year out of wrestling with an injury. McGee has since stated that he did not enjoy his time wrestling for FCW due to the ridicule and harsh treatment he'd received from the trainers there. He expressed his feelings in a Facebook post that
FCW wasn't a good place to work, so.
read, "Guys, I don't know how much longer I can handle this. Every day is a constant struggle to keep my sanity. I love wrestling, and it's all I ever wanted to do. Already going crazy since I've been injured for like 10 months now, but it gets worse. Every day a trainer goes out of his way to rib or disrespect me in front of the boys because I've been out for so long. I can't clear myself. I want to wrestle more than anything, but I don't even know who I am anymore. It's so fucking hard. I just feel it just building inside of me, and I don't know how much longer I can contain it. I have daydreams of just fucking everyone up on some real shit. I'm not a kid, I'm a man. But what do you do when the people in charge of helping you get to the main roster are the ones making your life the hardest? I've been drinking almost every day. It's to the point where I keep vodka and gin in my trunk. Help me. He
Damn, that affected him a lot.
deleted the post soon after, however, claiming he had been hacked. A friend of his says that being released from the WWE changed McGee, saying that he became like a completely different person and that he spiraled into an even deeper depression after his wife left him, and also following the death of his nephew. This led to his drinking becoming worse. Things did seem to take a positive turn for him when he met and began dating 25-year-old Bianca McGohey, who, like him, was a Missouri native living in Florida. Bianca was described by friends and family members as a very sweet, kind, and outgoing person who loved working with children and enjoyed spending time with her pet cats. Though the two
So, she's just gone down my hallway, screaming at the top of the lungs. Brilliant people here. Sorry I had to let. I should have kept going, but you probably wouldn't have heard a thing that was going on in this video.
Who eventually broke up. They apparently did so on good terms, and thus maintained contact with one another. McGee announced his return to wrestling, saying his first match back would take place on April 20th of that same year. His return would be short-lived, however, as 2 months after the match, Brian McGee would commit a horrific crime. On July 24, 2013, Bianca McGohey returned home to find McGee was parked nearby. She went to see what he was doing there. As she approached, he exited his car and walked towards her. Witnesses claim the two were talking to one another before McGee appeared to punch McGohey in the stomach, causing her to fall to her knees screaming in pain. The witnesses then went to call for help. When they returned, they found McGohey lying on the ground with a knife protruding from her stomach. She had been stabbed several times in the neck and abdomen and died at the scene. After
What the fuck? What the fuck?
fleeing the scene, McGee changed his profile picture on Facebook to an image he'd taken of McGohey's blood-stained arm. He then called his sister and mother, admitting to murdering Bianca McGohey. Police were already in pursuit of him, and this eventually escalated into a high-speed chase, which ended when McGee crashed his car into a guardrail. McGee then attempted to escape on foot, but was caught by a police dog and then arrested. After spending a night in the hospital, he was transferred to Pasco County Jail, still wearing his hospital gown. He was found guilty of first-degree murder in 2016, but was spared the death penalty and was instead sentenced to life in prison without parole.
Former pro wrestler
Makes sense.
Brian McGee did what many inmates have tried to do.
Mr. McGee would be sentenced to life in the Florida State Prison without possibility of parole.
He dodged the death penalty while it remains in limbo.
The state would withdraw their intention to seek the death penalty.
And got life in prison instead.
How do you plead today?
Guilty.
Are you pleading guilty because you believe it's in your best interest to do that?
Yes, ma'am.
While McGee avoids the possibility of death row, he will never leave prison alive.
Do you understand that in the state of Florida, life means life?
Yes, ma'am.
He is currently serving his sentence in the Appalachia Correctional Facility in Florida, punishment for the truly horrific and unforgivable crime he committed.
Yeah, totally justified. Go run in prison. Don't know this one either.
There's not much information on this case due to it not receiving much coverage, but it's definitely the most gruesome so far. Douglas Whitten was a wrestler who had fallen on hard times. Originally from Canton, Texas, he had moved to New Orleans and had been staying in a rehab center for his alcoholism. After signing himself out of the facility, he would be homeless. In October 1997, he was working at a local church It was here that he met a family of four: 37-year-old Owen Reeves, 33-year-old Gail Whitehead, 44-year-old Joe Donovan, and Gail Whitehead's 9-year-old son, Joey Whitehead.
Alright.
After speaking to the family and telling them his story, they took pity on him and offered him a place to stay with them at their home at 426 Borden Street until he managed to get back on his feet. A week later, Owen Reeves' co-workers called the police, saying that he hadn't come to work in almost a week and had not made any contact. When the police arrived at the family home, they were shocked to find that the four of them had all been brutally murdered, with the murder weapons having been a knife and a blunt object similar to a brick or a rock. Douglas Whitten was nowhere to be seen. On the night of October...
What the hell was he doing? Why did he do that? Why?
October 16th, a homeless woman named Jamie Rourke and her boyfriend David Smith, where he appeared to be wandering around aimlessly, carrying a duffel bag. David Smith was already acquainted with Whitten, having known him for 4 months to that point. The three of them had dinner together and managed to put enough money together to rent an apartment for the night. The next afternoon, Whitten told Rourke that he had done, quote, something bad, but wouldn't say what. That same day, while at the laundromat, Rourke saw a newspaper about 4 murders. Rourke and Smith then confronted Whitten about the article, believing he was the perpetrator of the murders. Whitten admitted to murdering Gail Whitehead because she would tease him and pull on his hair. He then killed Joe Donovan before finally killing Owen Reeves and Joey Whitehead. Rourke
Why though? Why did you need to kill all these people? I don't understand it.
and Smith went to the police after he told them this, who told them to lure Whitten out so he could be arrested. Rourke went with the police to the warehouse where she, her boyfriend, and Whitten were staying, and convinced Whitten to come out to help her carry a bag of dog food, at which point the police arrested him. In his confession, Whitten stated that he, quote, flew off the handle. He further stated that he had never gotten along with Gail, and that she made fun of him and stole from him. He remembered her looking up at him, and said that he hit her with his hands. He also stated that he, quote, sliced the victims and poked them with a frog gig to make sure they were dead. He could not remember doing anything to Donovan. He recalled Reeves walking in and asking him where Gail and Joey were. He also recalled Reeves asking why a table was on its side. And when Reeves went over to investigate after Whitten said there was a mouse in there, he hit Reeves on the head with a piece of marble. Whitten pleaded innocent to the charges, saying that he blacked out and wasn't aware of what he was doing. This plea did not work, however, and he was sentenced to life in prison without parole. There's no information on Whitten following his conviction in 1999, but he is obviously still in prison and will remain there until the day he dies, as punishment for the truly despicable act he committed all those years ago.
Juan Braza. I have no idea what this one is. The last one, everybody. Last one.
The final wrestler on this list. I believe I have definitely saved the worst for last, as Juana Barata is, without question, pure evil. She was born Juana Dayanara Barraza Sampiero in rural Hidalgo, Mexico in 1957.
Okay, but after we'll begin, this is all taking place in Mexico, I feel. So.
Her parents were Trinidad Barraza, a police officer, and Justa Sampiero, an alcoholic prostitute. When Juana was only 3 months old, her mother abandoned her father to begin a relationship with her own stepfather, who Juana would subsequently come to view as her father figure due to being separated from her biological father. As a child, Juana never learned to read and had a rocky relationship with her mother, to whom she barely spoke to in her infancy. At the age of 12, Juana was pimped by her mother to a man named Jose Lugo in return for 3 beers. Lugo would abuse Juana for the next 4 years, impregnating her twice, though both pregnancies resulted in miscarriages. Juana finally left for Mexico City after her mother died of cirrhosis. During her time there, she would have several failed marriages and have 4 children. During the 1980s and
Damn. Self-found marriage with 4 children has a scenario with multiple miscarriages. What the hell, man? Shit.
1990s, Juana held a variety of jobs and toured central Mexico as a masked wrestler named La Dama del Silencio, or the Lady of Silence, an alias she chose in reference to her own shy, silent personality. In 1995, short of cash after the birth of her 4th child, Juana began to steal items from stores, and this later evolved to burglarizing homes. In 1990,
Damn. Shouldn't be able to break into homes. Holy crap, you can't be that desperate for stuff. Holy crap.
1986, she hatched a plan with a friend, Araceli Tapia Martinez, to steal from the elderly. The two dressed in white clothes and pretended to be nurses.
Oh, hell no. That's all I needed to hear. Oh, no, you don't be doing that. Don't pretend to be nurses just so you can rob people. That's fucked up, man, on a whole nother level. What the hell? That is so messed up.
In order to gain access to the homes of elderly people living alone, robbing them once they were inside. However, Martinez was also in a relationship with a corrupt federal police officer, Moses Flores Dominguez, and they concocted a plan to extort Juana. Dominguez met Juana after a burglary that she had committed alone, and he demanded 12,000 pesos in return for not arresting her.
Oh, you got Mr. Corrupt over here. Okay, so corrupt police officer demanding he won't arrest her. She gives him 12,000 pesos. Okay, this little... Alright. Not shocked. We got Mexican corrupt police, just saying. Not shocked.
In the year 2000, Juana retired from wrestling, where she earned 300 to 500 pesos per fight, and her situation became desperate. Around this time, brutal murders of elderly people in Mexico City began to increase, fueling press speculation about the existence of a serial killer dubbed El Mata Viejitas. However, Mexico City police denied any connection between the crimes, and a number of people were imprisoned for some of the murders.
How is there no... Never mind.
Juana actually had nothing to do with the murders committed in that time.
Just Mexicans thing. Never mind.
But soon, she would add another elderly woman to the list of murders in Mexico City. Juana's first victim was Maria Gonzalez Anaya, who was killed on November 25, 2002. Once in her apartment, Gonzalez made comments that Juana considered derogatory. She was infuriated by this and beat Gonzalez just before fatally strangling her with her bare hands. Juana did not kill again for 3 months.
Damn, that's a hell of a lot of anger being taken out. Holy shit.
And she might have been inspired to do it again by existing stories about the Mata Viejitas, rather than inspiring them herself. Juana approached her victims on the street or knocked on their door, pretending to be a city council nurse or social worker. Initially, she would disguise herself by simply dressing in white clothes, but later, she acquired a genuine nurse's uniform. Depending on her victims' health, she would gain their trust and accede to their homes by offering massages or help in obtaining medicines. If her victims were distracted, she strangled them directly. If not, she would beat them first, using moves learned in her wrestling career, though she carried a bag with medical tools as part of her disguise.
Wow. Wow.
Juana usually strangled her victims manually, or with a ligature taken from the victim's own home, which
That is insane, man. That is insane.
she would leave at the crime scene. She would also rob the victims after killing them, mostly for her own gain, but she would also keep some of their items as trophies. The crimes increased sharply afterward. By November 5, 2003, police had enough evidence and witness testimonies to believe that a serial killer was involved, and that it was a tall person posing as a city council nurse or social worker to gain the victim's trust. In December 2005, the police released a wanted poster with 2 eyewitness sketches of the Mata Viejitas. One
yeah, you know what? Never mind. I'm not gonna try to say that name. I won't get that anymore. But interesting that the 2 people have been identified now, and now just looking for
more feminine and another more masculine looking, but the sketches were labeled as persons of interest only, and there was no mention of their clothing. It wasn't until the following year that police finally admitted to the existence of a serial killer. The attacks increased in rage and frequency, and the times when the murders occurred changed from daytime to nighttime. The killing of 82-year-old Carmen Camila Gonzalez Miguel on September 28, 2005, officer patrols in the areas where the killer was active increased. Pamphlets advising the elderly to be wary of strangers were distributed, along with new sketches, and the police even paid elderly women to act as bait in the park areas. The lack of murders after October made investigators consider that the killer had committed. However, on January 25, 2006, Juana was seen by a tenant as she left the murder scene of landlady Ana Maria Alfaro, and she was arrested by a passing police patrol. Though Juana was illiterate, A search of her home found a trophy room with newspaper clippings of the murders. Juana was also made to pose next to a bust and eyewitness sketches of the Mata Viejitas. This was actually criticized as misleading the public into thinking that the police had been on the right trail to finding Juana.
Yeah, boss said that's a stupid decision to do. So like, look, see, we got her. She's right there. She's here. It's the thingy. That's just, you weren't paying attention at all, Mexico police.
In fact, Juana had previously been at a police station and was even interviewed on a TV program about wrestling just 1 week before her arrest, all without arousing suspicion. In 2008, Juana was tried for 30 murders and was found guilty of 16 of them, and also of 12 robberies. Juana was sentenced to 759 years in prison.
Yeah, he nailed it. Most evil wrestler ever lived. Yeah, he nailed it. He nailed it.
But she will be paroled regardless in 2058, at the age of 100. Some may say that Jimmy Savile is the most evil person on this list, due to how long he committed his horrible acts and used his connections to get away with it. But considering Juana was an honest-to-God serial killer and took great joy in the attention her crimes got, there's no denying that she truly is a heartless, evil person.
Oh, yeah.
She actually has more victims than most of the people mentioned on my 6 serial killers with the highest IQs video. The only 2 people on that list with more confirmed victims than her are Ted Bundy and Harold Shipman. And even then, they were convicted for only 3 and 15 murders respectively. If Mexico still enforced the death penalty, there's no doubt she would have been sentenced to death for her cruel and unforgivable crimes. There is no doubt in my mind that Juana Barraza truly is the most evil wrestler who has ever lived. Now, I know people are going to leave comments asking why Chris Benoit wasn't on this list, since we all know what he did. I didn't put him on here because I simply don't think he can be completely held responsible for the murder of his wife and son, as a coroner's report found that the amount of damage he'd suffered to his brain from repeated head trauma over his career had left him in the same condition as an 80-year-old Alzheimer's patient due to many concussions combined with his long history of steroid use, and it's clear his mind just completely shattered and caused him to fly into a blind rage that left his family dead. It's possible he didn't even recognize them by that point, and when he finally regained control over himself and saw what he had done, he was so overcome with shock, grief and regret that he felt he just couldn't go on, and we sadly know what he did next. These reasons are why I just can't call him evil. The act he committed was truly horrifying, but he was so far gone that there can't have been any evil intent behind it because he literally had no idea what he was doing. Anyway,
Alright, I can work with that. I can be fair with that. Okay. I can accept that. Alright. That works for me. I was wondering why Ben wasn't on here. That makes no sense. But anyways, everybody, thank you for joining me here on the Wrestling Multiverse YouTube channel. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, comment what you think down below. And yeah, thank you all for watching this. I don't know if I'll do any more wrestling reactions, but we'll see. Thank you all for watching this, and I'll see you maybe for the next one. Maybe not. I'll see you.